I paid my best friend to end my life, and for 25 minutes, I was dead. You see, from the outside, I had it all. The sprawling mansion that always felt cold, even in the summer. The keys to a supercar that sat in the garage, collecting dust like a forgotten trophy. I was the king of a hollow kingdom, smiling for cameras at parties where I didn't know a single soul. Every new success, every new million, just dug the hole in my soul a little deeper. I remember standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of my penthouse looking down at the city lights. They were like a million tiny stars, but I'd never felt more alone. Money bought me company, but it never bought me connection. It bought pleasure, but it never ever bought me joy. I was drowning in an ocean of nothing, and the silence in my life was deafening. The pain had become a physical thing, a constant weight on my chest. I just couldn't take it anymore. Before all of that, before the darkness and the light, my life was a perfectly curated photograph with no soul. I was the guy on the cover of business magazines. The tech wunderkind who'd built $1 billion empire from a garage. That was the story anyway. The real story was a lot less glamorous. My day would start with automated blinds sliding open, flooding my sterile glass-walled apartment with a cold, gray dawn. I'd look out over the city, this kingdom I'd supposedly conquered, and feel nothing, absolutely nothing. It was like watching a movie of someone else's life. I'd put on the $1,000 suit, the armor I wore to face the world, and the reflection in the mirror was a stranger. His eyes were tired, empty. The meetings were always the same. A blur of faces, all nodding at me, laughing a little too loud at my jokes. They saw the success, the power. What they didn't see was the suffocating panic that clawed at my throat every time I had to pretend I had all the answers. They all thought I was some kind of self-made genius. The truth? My first big success, the one that launched everything, it wasn't entirely my idea. I took it. I took it from someone who trusted me, and I buried that secret so deep I almost convinced myself it never happened. Almost. But that lie was like a poison. It seeped into everything. The women I dated, they were beautiful, smart, and they looked great at charity galas. But our conversations were like scripts. We never talked about fear or doubt or what really kept us up at night. I couldn't let anyone get that close. How could I? I didn't even know who I was anymore. The only person who saw a glimpse of the real me was Mark. He'd known me since we were kids, flipping burgers and dreaming of a life just like this. He'd look at me sometimes across the table at some ridiculously expensive restaurant, and his eyes would hold a question. He knew something was broken, he just didn't know how badly. The nights were the worst. The silence in that penthouse was a physical thing. It was heavy. I'd stand there, a glass of whiskey in my hand, the ice clinking like a tiny, lonely bell. I had everything a man could ever want, but my soul was starving to death. I had built a gilded cage and locked myself inside. And the worst part, the part that kept me awake until the sun came up, was that I had no idea how to get out. But what happened next was even worse. I found a way out, or so I thought. The idea didn't come to me in a flash of lightning. It was more like a slow, creeping vine wrapping itself around my thoughts until it choked everything else out. It started with little things. Signs, I guess you'd call them. Warnings that I was too deep in the darkness to even notice. I remember driving home one night, rain lashing against the windshield of my ridiculously expensive car. I was going too fast. I always went too fast. A car shot out of a side street, its headlights blinding me for a second. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screaming on the wet asphalt as I swerved, missing it by inches. My heart was pounding, a wild drum against my ribs. And for a split second, a single terrifying thought hit me. I almost died. The strange part? I wasn't relieved. I was disappointed. That was the first time I realized how twisted my thinking had become. Why was I afraid of an accident when all I wanted was an end? Then there was the phone call with Mark a few days later. He'd called to check in, his voice laced with that familiar, cautious concern. "You sound tired, man," he said. I could picture him probably leaning back in his worn-out office chair, a world away from my sterile penthouse. "We haven't hung out in forever. Let's just grab a beer, like the old days." I gave him some excuse about a deadline, a trip. The lie felt like ash in my mouth. What he didn't know was that I'd been avoiding him for weeks. He was the only one who could still see the cracks in my mask, and I couldn't risk him getting a look inside. He sighed, a sound of pure frustration and love. "Whatever's going on," he said softly. "You know you can tell me." I just said I know and hung up. The click of the phone ending the call echoed in the silence of my apartment like a gunshot. I had just pushed away the only life raft I had left. The real breaking point, though, happened that Friday. I was in my office staring at a spreadsheet, but the numbers were just swimming in front of my eyes. Suddenly the walls started to close in. My chest tightened, a band of steel squeezing the air from my lungs. I couldn't breathe. A cold sweat drenched my shirt and my vision started to tunnel. I thought I was having a heart attack. This was it. The end I'd been craving was happening right here on the 50th floor. But what I felt wasn't acceptance. It was pure animal terror. I collapsed to the floor, clawing at my tie, gasping for air that wouldn't come. After what felt like an eternity, it passed. I was left shaking, curled up on $1 million rug, feeling utterly pathetic. And that's when the first terrible revelation hit me. I didn't just want to die. I wanted to be dead. I couldn't bear the thought of the pain, the fear, the messy process of it all. I wanted to skip the ending and just get to the credits. I was a coward. A coward who had built an empire but couldn't even face his own exit. But then came the second revelation, the one that changed everything. As I lay there, the city lights beginning to twinkle outside my window, a new thought, clear and sharp as a shard of glass, cut through the panic. I couldn't do it myself, but I didn't have to. There was one person in the world who loved me enough, who understood loyalty in a way no one else did. One person I trusted with my life. And in that moment, I realized I would have to trust him with my death. My hand was shaking as I picked up my phone. His name glowed on the screen. Mark, the man I'd just pushed away. And I knew, with a horrifying certainty, what I was about to ask him to do. What do you think happens to a friendship when you cross a line like that? If my story has touched you, please subscribe and turn on notifications. I have so much more to share about what comes after the darkness. The meeting with Mark felt like a scene from a movie I never wanted to be in. We were in my office, the city lights a cold, indifferent backdrop. I slid the briefcase across the polished mahogany desk. The latches clicked open, revealing stacks of cash. More money than he'd ever seen in his life. He didn't even look at it. His eyes, the same eyes that had seen me through scraped knees in my first heartbreak, were filled with a terrifying mix of horror and pity. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. "Don't make me do this," he whispered, his voice cracking. It was the sound of a man being torn in two. I just looked at him, my own expression a blank mask. I couldn't afford to feel anything. If I let even a crack of emotion show, I'd shatter. "It's the only way, Mark," I said, my voice flat, devoid of life. "Please, set me free." He stared at me for what felt like an eternity, searching for the friend he used to know. He didn't find him, he just found me. The ghost. Finally, he gave a single, jerky nod. A motion that sealed my fate and damned his soul. We chose a stretch of highway up in the mountains. A winding two-lane road famous for its blind curves and steep drop-offs. It was perfect. We drove in his old beat-up pickup truck, not my supercar. It felt right somehow, more honest. The vinyl seats were cracked, and the air smelled faintly of oil and old coffee. The only sound was the hum of the engine, a funeral dirge for a life I was so desperate to throw away. He gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. He was driving me to my grave, and I knew a part of him was dying with me. What he didn't know, what I never told him, was that I'd already picked out a trust for his kids. He was doing this for me, but I was making sure his family would be secure forever. It was the only decent thing I had left to give. As we neared the designated curve, a strange calm washed over me. The great void I'd been chasing was finally here. I looked out the window at the dark silhouettes of pine trees flashing by. I didn't think about my company, the money, or the empire of glass and steel I'd built on a foundation of lies. My final thought, the very last image that flickered through my mind, was of us as kids. We were maybe 10 years old, sitting on a dock with our feet in the water, fishing with cheap rods. The sun was warm on our faces. We had nothing, and we had everything. A single hot tear traced a path through the dust on my cheek. Then Mark's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. They were swimming with tears, one last shared look of a lifetime of brotherhood. He whispered something, but I couldn't hear it over the engine. It might have been, "I'm sorry," or maybe "I love you." Then he yanked the wheel hard to the right. The world became a symphony of destruction. The shriek of tires on asphalt was the first sound, followed by the sickening crunch of metal hitting the guardrail. It gave way like paper. For a split second, we were airborne. Time stretched and warped. I saw the night sky, a million cold stars where the road should have been. Then came the impact. A violent, bone-shattering jolt as we hit the side of the mountain. The world tumbled, over and over. Glass exploded inwards, a shower of deadly diamonds. It wasn't pain I felt first. It was just immense pressure, a crushing weight that squeezed the air from my lungs. I felt a strange lightness, a sense of unspooling, like a thread being pulled from a tapestry. The sound of Mark screaming my name faded, replaced by a high-pitched ringing. My own heartbeat, a frantic drum, slowed, thump, 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 and then stopped. The world didn't fade to black. It shattered into a million pieces of absolute silence. What happens when the person you trust most in the world is the one who has to break you? If this story is resonating with you, please subscribe and hit the bell. What I saw in that silence is something everyone needs to hear. There was no tunnel of light, no choir of angels. There was just a stop. A sudden, absolute end to everything. The last echo of Mark's scream, the final crunch of metal, the last beat of my heart, it all just vanished. One moment, I was experiencing the most violent end imaginable. The next, there was nothing. A silence so profound it was a sound in itself. I wasn't floating above the wreck. I wasn't looking down at my own broken body. I was just somewhere else. At first, I didn't even have a sense of self. It was like being a single thought adrift in a vast, empty ocean. I tried to open my eyes, but I didn't have any. I tried to take a breath, but I had no lungs. The panic was immediate and primal. I was a ghost, a point of pure consciousness, stripped of everything that had ever made me human. And the darkness, it wasn't the absence of light. It was a substance. It was heavy, cold, and it seemed to press in on me from all sides, suffocating the very essence of who I was. It felt ancient and alive. I could feel it seeping into me, a chilling despair that was a million times worse than the sadness I'd felt in my penthouse. That was human sadness. This was something else entirely. This was the death of hope itself. Then the sounds began. They didn't come through ears. They were just there, inside my consciousness. A low, constant hum at first, like a million distant power lines. But it grew, and within the hum, I started to hear other things. Whispers, cries. Not the sound of physical pain, but the sound of pure, eternal regret. The sound of souls who had made the wrong choice, screaming into an eternity that would never answer back. I was in a place made of sorrow, and that's when the third, most terrifying revelation of all hit me. I had begged for an escape from my pain. I had wanted the end. But I had never, not for 1 second, considered what came after the end. I had traded a gilded cage on earth for an infinite prison in the dark. I wasn't free. I had just been transferred, and I could feel something else in there with me. Something vast, and old, and hungry. It was coming for me. Have you ever wondered if hell is a real place? I don't have to wonder anymore. If my journey is speaking to you, subscribe and ring that bell. Because what I saw next is a warning that everyone needs to hear. Just as that ancient, hungry presence closed in, a voice echoed not in the air but inside the very fabric of my soul. It was a voice made of rust and decay, a guttural sound that felt like scraping stone. You threw away the gift, it hissed, a wave of triumphant malice washing over me. You chose this. You belong to us now. The despair was absolute. It was a finality worse than any death. In that pit of eternal regret with nothing left to lose, I screamed. Not with a voice because I had none, but with the last spark of who I once was. A single, desperate thought. A name I hadn't uttered with any meaning in decades. God. And he answered. It wasn't a gradual dawn. It was an explosion. A silent, shattering detonation of pure white light that tore through the suffocating darkness. The shadows recoiled, hissing and dissolving like smoke in a hurricane. The terrifying presence was just gone. The chilling cold was replaced by a warmth that seeped into the deepest parts of my being. It wasn't heat, it was love. A love so profound, so unconditional, it felt like coming home after a lifetime of being lost in a blizzard. I wasn't in a place anymore. I was a place. I was awareness, floating in an ocean of pure peace and acceptance. The colors, if you could call them that, were shades of light my human eyes could never have processed. They pulsed with life, with joy. Then the communication began. It wasn't a voice, not like the one in the darkness. It was a knowing, a pure, unfiltered transfer of truth that flowed into me. There was no judgment, only a deep paternal sadness for the pain I had caused myself. And then I saw my life, not like a movie, but from the inside out. I was standing in my old partner's shoes the moment I stole his idea, and I felt his heart break, his trust shatter into a million pieces. I felt the hollow ache of every woman I ever dated. The loneliness they felt even as they lay next to me. I felt Mark's gut-wrenching anguish as he yanked that steering wheel. The tearing of his soul as he did the one thing he thought would save his best friend. I felt every ripple of pain I had ever created, and the weight of it was crushing. But through it all, that immense, unconditional love held me. It didn't excuse my actions, but it separated them from my soul. It showed me the truth I'd spent my whole life running from. My worth was never in the penthouse, the cars, or the company. It was inherent. It had been there all along, buried under a mountain of lies I had told myself. The lie that I wasn't good enough without the success. The lie that I couldn't be loved for who I really was. I had built a prison of my own making and handed the key to the devil. As this understanding washed over me, healing the deepest wounds I carried, a final, clear message settled into my being. It was a thought that was both a gentle command and a loving gift. This is not your time, my child. Your story is not over. I understood then that this place, this incredible peace, was a home I could one day return to, but it was not my home yet. I was at a border, a sacred line I was not yet permitted to cross. I had been shown the truth. Now I had to go back and live it. The peace was so complete, so absolute, that the thought of leaving felt like a betrayal. Why would anyone choose to go back to a world of broken glass and broken promises when you could stay here forever, wrapped in this unconditional love? For a moment, a selfish, human moment, I wanted to refuse. I wanted to stay in that light for eternity. Had found the home my soul had been searching for my entire life. To leave it was to choose pain all over again. But the knowing that flowed through me wasn't a command. It was a purpose. I was shown not what I had done, but what I could do. I saw a life I never thought possible. A life where my hands weren't just signing checks, but were holding someone else's. A life where my smile wasn't a mask for the cameras, but a genuine reflection of a joy that came from within. I saw Mark's face, not as the man who helped me die, but as the brother whose soul was now shattered by what he'd done for me. I had to go back, not for myself, but for him. I had to go back to tell him he was forgiven. I had to go back to learn how to forgive myself. The decision was made not with words, but with a simple turn of my will, and the universe responded. The return wasn't a gentle float back down to earth. It was a violent cosmic snap. It felt like being ripped backward through a keyhole at the speed of light. The ocean of warmth drained away in an instant, replaced by a rushing interstellar cold. The colors of heaven folded in on themselves, collapsing into a single point of gray. The beautiful knowing shattered into a million fragments of confusion, and the silence was torn apart by a high-pitched ringing that grew louder and louder. Then came the impact. It was the opposite of death. It was a brutal, agonizing birth. I was slammed back into my body with the force of 1,000 car crashes. The first thing I felt was pain, a symphony of it. Every nerve ending screamed at once. The crushing weight on my chest, the fire in my lungs, the sharp, jagged edges of broken bone. The first physical sensation was the cold, wet slick of blood on my face. The first smell was gasoline and rain. The first sound was a distant siren, a wail that seemed to be crying for the man I used to be. I tried to take a breath, and it was like swallowing a lungful of fire and glass. My eyelids were heavy, like LED curtains. With every ounce of strength I had, I forced one of them open. The world was a blurry, upside-down mess of twisted metal and flashing red lights. A face leaned over me, streaked with rain and tears. It was Mark. His mouth was moving, screaming my name over and over, his voice raw with the grief I had forced upon him. I was back. The man who had wanted to die was gone, and in his place was someone who was just beginning to learn how to live. If you had been given a second chance like that, would you have the courage to completely change your life? If this story is moving you, please subscribe and turn on all notifications. The story of what happened when I woke up in that hospital is even more unbelievable. Waking up wasn't a gentle drift back to consciousness. It was a violent slam. One moment, the memory of that perfect, loving light was everything. The next, a machine was screaming in my ear and a fire was raging in my chest. Every breath felt like I was inhaling shards of glass. The sterile white ceiling of the hospital room was the cruelest thing I'd ever seen. It was a blank, empty canvas where the vibrant colors of heaven had been just moments before. The rhythmic, insistent beep of the heart monitor wasn't a sound of life to me. It was the ticking of a clock in a new kind of prison. I was back, and I had never felt more alone. The doctors and nurses would come in, their faces a mix of professional concern and outright disbelief. They used words like miraculous. One of them, a young resident with tired eyes, told me I was a legend on the ICU floor. "We lost you, he said, looking at my chart as if it were a fantasy novel. For 25 minutes, no pulse, no brain activity. We were about to call it. Then you just came back." He shook his head and walked away, leaving me with the chilling confirmation. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination from the trauma. It was real. I had a number for my time in eternity, 25 minutes. But the hardest part was Mark. He'd sit by my bed for hours, looking like a ghost. He'd lost weight, and his face was a roadmap of guilt. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He'd just stare at the foredrip, watching the clear fluid run into my veins as if it were poison he'd administered himself. I could feel his pain. It radiated off him in waves, a suffocating agony that was 1,000 times worse than my own broken bones. He thought he had destroyed his best friend. What he didn't know, the secret I held in my heart, was that he had saved him. But how could I ever make him understand that? The world I had come back to felt wrong. It was like watching a movie in black and white after you've seen it in brilliant color. The news on the TV, the stock market updates, the hushed conversations about my company, it all sounded like a foreign language I no longer understood. It was all so small. I had been somewhere where none of that mattered. I had this incredible, impossible truth burning inside me, a secret that redefined life and death itself. And I was surrounded by people who were worried about quarterly earnings. It was a new kind of isolation, deeper than any I'd felt in my penthouse. A few weeks later, after I was moved out of the ICU, Mark was visiting again. The silence between us was heavy, thick, with everything we couldn't say. He was staring out the window, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I finally found my voice, though it came out as a raw, painful rasp. "Mark," I said. He flinched, but didn't turn around. "Look at me." Slowly, he turned. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. Before he could apologize for the 1,000th time, I said the two words he never expected to hear. "Thank you." He just stared, his expression a mess of confusion and hurt. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "For what? For killing you?" And that's when the first real piece of the new me, the man who came back, finally broke through. I looked my best friend in the eye, the man who was willing to damn his own soul for me, and I told him the truth. Not all of it, not yet, but the part he needed to hear. "You didn't kill me, Mark," I said, a single tear tracing a path down my cheek. "The man who got in that truck with you was already dead. You set me free so I could come back and actually live." The dam broke. He collapsed into the chair by my bed, sobbing, and for the first time in my entire adult life, I reached out and held him, trying to pour all the love and peace I'd been shown into him. How do you begin to repay a friend who went to hell and back for you? If this story is helping you see things differently, please subscribe and turn on your notifications. Because learning to walk again was nothing compared to learning how to live with a miracle. The physical therapy was hell. Learning to walk again on legs that had been shattered was a daily lesson in agony. But it was nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to rewiring my soul. The world I came back to felt out of tune. The lawyers would visit my hospital room, talking about stock options and damage control for the company, and their words sounded like gibberish. It was like they were speaking a language I no longer understood. I'd look out the window and see a janitor taking a smoke break, leaning against a brick wall with the sun on his face. And I felt a wave of envy so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of me. He had a piece I'd have traded my entire empire for. My old life, the one I had literally killed myself to build, was a ghost, and I wanted it exorcised. My first act of freedom wasn't walking out of that hospital. It was calling my board of directors from my bed and telling them I was liquidating my position, selling everything. The penthouse, the company, the cars, the watches. My lead attorney, a man who'd seen me chew through competitors like a shark, looked at me as if I'd grown a second head. He kept talking about my legacy, about the empire I'd built. I just smiled. What he didn't know was that my real legacy began the moment my heart stopped. Signing those papers, watching billions of dollars dissolve into numbers on a screen, felt like cutting the anchor chains that had been drowning me my whole life. I walked out of that hospital with a limp, a few $1 million to my name instead of a few billion, and a soul that was finally learning how to breathe. But none of that mattered without Mark. Our friendship had been forged in childhood, but it was reborn in the crucible of my death. We didn't talk about what happened on that road for a long time. We didn't have to. Instead, we did the things we used to do. We went fishing at the lake from my last memory, using cheap rods and a bucket of worms. We sat there for hours, the silence between us comfortable, healed. One afternoon, as the sun was setting, he finally turned to me, his eyes clear for the first time in months. "I still have nightmares," he said, his voice quiet. I looked at him, my brother. I told him. "I have memories of coming home." I told him everything then, about the darkness, the regret, the light, the unconditional love. I told him that by yanking that wheel, he hadn't damned himself. He had been the instrument of my salvation. I watched the guilt of a lifetime lift from his shoulders, and in its place a bond that not even death could break. For a while I just lived. I bought a small house in a town where no one knew my name. I learned the joy of mowing my own lawn, of cooking a simple meal, of watching a thunderstorm roll in from the front porch. But the memory of that darkness, of those other lost souls whispering in that void, never left me. I had been given the ultimate gift, a get-out-of-hell-free card, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it came with a responsibility. I wasn't sent back just to enjoy the sunshine. I was sent back with a message. I was a survivor of a shipwreck that no one else knew existed, and I had a moral obligation to tell people about the rocks. That's when I knew what I had to do. My old life was about building walls of glass and steel. My new life would be about building bridges. I didn't have a company to run, but I had a story to tell. A story that might reach another man standing in his penthouse, another woman drowning in an ocean of nothing, and let them know they aren't alone, that there is hope beyond the pain, that the end is not the end. So I turned on a camera, just a simple one, and I started to talk. I decided to share my journey, from the gilded cage to the 25 minutes of hell, to the impossible, beautiful light. My new purpose wasn't to build an empire of wealth, but an empire of hope, one story at a time. If you were given a second chance, a true clean slate, what would be the very first thing you'd build with it? If this story has given you a reason to hold on, please subscribe and turn on your notifications. My next story is about the first person I ever saved, and it will change how you see the strangers you pass every day. So that's my story. I had to go to hell and back to understand a truth that was right in front of me the whole time. The life I built, the one that looked so perfect on the cover of magazines, was a gilded cage. I was the only prisoner. I thought freedom was an escape hatch, a final exit, but I was wrong. True freedom isn't about escaping your life, it's about finally learning how to live it. The real treasures were never in the penthouse or the bank vaults. They were in a quiet moment with a friend, in the warmth of the sun, in the simple, beautiful peace of just being. You don't have to go where I went to understand this. We all build our own little hells here on earth, don't we? The hell of regret, of believing we're not enough, of chasing things that leave us emptier than when we started. We get lost in a darkness of our own making. But I'm telling you, as someone who has been to the absolute bottom, there is a light that is always waiting. It's not a million miles away in the afterlife. It's right here, waiting for you to turn toward it. I was given a second chance, a miracle I will never understand. But you don't need a miracle like mine. Your second chance can start with your very next breath. The man who got in that truck is gone. He burned away in those 25 minutes. What came back is someone who understands that my worth was never tied to my net worth. It was just there, inherent, a gift. The same gift that's inside of you right now. All I do now is try to honor that gift every single day. So I have to ask you, looking at your own life right now, what is the one thing you're holding on to that's keeping you from truly being free? My journey back from the abyss is just one story. There are so many others out there, stories of hope, of redemption, of people who found their light in the darkest of places. If this story has touched you, please subscribe and be sure to turn on all notifications, because we're going to share more of them. We're going to prove together that no one is ever too lost to be found.